What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be going over my 5 reasons why I left Orlando, Florida in 2017. Alright guys, so like I said, I'm going to go over the top 5 reasons why I decided to leave Orlando, Florida back in 2017. And I just want to say, if you're new to the channel, be sure you subscribe down below. That way you never miss out on a future video, and click the little bell. That way you get notified about new videos. And if you are back from a previous video, make sure you give this video a thumbs up. So if you've watched my videos before, you know that I lived my life there. I grew up there. I went to college there. I went to the University of Central Florida. And ultimately after that, I started getting some jobs and I started to move up the corporate ladder, and I started to kind of start setting foundations and building a life for myself in Florida. So ultimately, the reason why I decided to leave is, number one, I wanted to challenge myself. I had never left the nest, as you would call it. It was my comfort zone. It was where I was familiar with. It was home. It was where, my mom was. It was where my dad was until he passed away a few years ago. It was where my family was. It was where all of my memories were. So I wanted to challenge myself to try something different. I had friends that had gone to different colleges throughout the state, or maybe to another state. Maybe they came back home after, but then they got a job after college, in Massachusetts or Michigan or California or Arizona, like wherever. All of my friends kind of moved all over the place. And I found myself almost feeling like I was missing out. I found myself just feeling like I wanted to try something different. I wanted to actually see new things. I wanted to venture out a little bit more. So ultimately, what happened in 2016 was I visited Los Angeles for the very first time. I was not even supposed to really be there. What happened was it was cheaper to fly to LA and then to Vegas versus direct to Vegas. It was a weird thing with the flights. So that's what we did. I ended up going to LA for the first time. I really liked it. I joked on my Instagram story about wanting to move there, and then 7 months later I actually ended up moving there. So it all happened very, very fast, but I wanted to try to make it on my own. I wanted to challenge myself. I wanted to see what else was out there. And honestly, the best way that I've found that is just to throw yourself out there. 9 times out of 10, anytime I put myself in a situation, I've always found a way out. There's something that when you get under pressure, when you do things you're uncomfortable with, when you have to find a way to make it work, you ultimately get really creative and you start thinking outside of the box. You start becoming stronger and you start doing things that you never thought you could do. So that was one of the main reasons why I did want to leave, was just I had never left my hometown and I wanted to challenge myself. And what better place to do it than LA? People say that if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. And ultimately, I did make it there. I was there 15 months and I ultimately just decided it wasn't for me. So I came here to Las Vegas, and I don't know where the future is going to bring me, but so far I'm here in Vegas. So the second reason why I left is ultimately, like I said, I started building a life in Orlando. I had a great relationship at the time, by far the best relationship that I have ever been in. And it was very hard to leave that, but I found myself in a position where I felt like I was starting to kind of settle down. I was starting to really get rooted there had I stayed in that relationship. And I just did not want to be that person that 10, 15 years from now, blames somebody else for not doing what I wanted to do. And I wanted to be able to get that out of my system. I wanted to try to bet on myself. I wanted to take a risk, and I wanted to see a new city. And ultimately, this person that I was dating, they just did not want to move. They had a future there that they wanted to go after in Orlando with their career, and I totally respect that. So I was not going to force anybody or try to convince anybody to come with me either, because I didn't want her to then blame me. Like I said, the same thing 10, 15 years later, that she didn't do what she wanted to do because she sacrificed her thing to come with me. So I think it was just a weird time. Your mid-20s to late 20s are always like a weird time where you're kind of like finding out what you want to do and trying different things. So for me, I wanted to go ahead and do that rather than having regret later in life. And some people argue that you could regret that, you left and, you're regretting leaving that relationship because you don't know what could have happened. And ultimately I look at it as I don't necessarily regret the things that I do. They may be lessons and maybe, you know, hey, I could do this differently, or maybe this, maybe that. But I only regret the things that I didn't do, because when you don't do them, you always wonder what if. And I, again, just did not want to blame her 10 years down the road that I never did this because I sacrificed it and I stayed here for you and I wish this would have never happened, and who knows. So ultimately that would be my next reason why I decided to leave. Reason number 3 that I left was mostly because of just life events that had happened over the years. Like I mentioned previously in this video, and back in 2012, I actually lost my dad to suicide. And that was a very, very rough time for me. It still is to this day. I've learned to evolve and I've learned to be at peace with it and I've learned to live with it. It doesn't make it necessarily any easier. You just learn to live with it. And ultimately I found myself always in Orlando seeing things that reminded me of things that I used to do with my dad, places I used to go with my dad, places that I grew up in. And I just kind of was at a point where I wanted to escape all of that. I wanted to try to start a new chapter. I kind of wanted to have a rebirth of myself, and I wanted to do that in a new city. I just had so many things in Orlando that, again, were just reminding me of that. And just at the time, it just felt right for me to want to relocate somewhere else and to just try something new and to get around different things that didn't remind me of past events. So that would be my reason number 3. I know that's not like something that everybody can relate to, but I mean, you think about it, like whether you have a parent that died, a dog that died, a friend that died, whatever it is, there's always things that kind of remind you. And like, I wasn't always sad about those things. Sometimes those memories were very, very good and they would bring me happiness. But I don't know, I just was at a point where I think never leaving, never seeing anything else, and just always being around it was kind of becoming a point where I just felt that I wanted to have a rebirth, a fresh start somewhere else. So that's reason number 3. Reason number 4 was that I just wanted to get into a new city. I know this is kind of relaying back on reason number 1, but like I said, I wanted to get into a faster paced environment. I wanted to go somewhere that had an environment that supported me as a person. Some people who are very ambitious. It had people who are driven. It had people who wanted more out of life, people who were free thinkers, people who were entrepreneur thinkers like I am myself. And in Orlando, I just didn't really have that. I felt like people kind of always worked in hospitality. People were very stagnant. They just went to work. They just talked about their job. Nobody was really thinking outside of the box. Nobody was doing anything different. Everybody was just following the traditional path that was given to you. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. That's what some people should do. I don't think that everybody should be, you know, an entrepreneur. I don't think that everybody should be their own boss. I don't think that everybody should be a free, you know, worker who does their own thing. But for me, you know, I'm very self-aware of who I am. I'm very self-aware of my traits, my qualities, my strengths, and ultimately what I wanted out of life. So I wanted to put myself into a new city that had that sort of environment, that had people like that I could connect with, people that I could, you know, network with and build myself. And ultimately that's why I decided to choose Los Angeles. I was between Miami and Los Angeles, and I was like, well, if I'm gonna go to Miami, that's very close. It's only 3 hours away. You know, that's not really gonna put me too much outside of my comfort zone. I could easily come back home. Whereas if I move to Los Angeles, it's very hard for me to come back home. So I'm going to have to push myself, and like I said in point 1, challenge myself to actually make it work. So that's reason number 4. And reason number 5 is quite simply, I wanted to take a risk in my life. There's a lot of people who just coast through life doing the same thing. They wake up at the same time. They have the same routine. They have the same route to work. They have the same job at work. People say they have 20 years of experience, but at the end of the day, if you're doing the same job for 20 years, you have 1 year repeated 20 times because nothing is changing. Nothing is different in your day-to-day operations. So I wanted to take a risk. I just know that sort of pattern, that sort of schedule, that sort of predictability is not something in me. It's not how I am wired. Some people it works great for, but for me, I crave change. I actually thrive under pressure. I thrive in risky situations. Every time I've gone through a risky situation, I have always made it work. I think back to college where I would cram right before an exam and I would pass it with flying colors. And then there was times where I would study slowly, and I would actually fail the exam. I just know that I perform really well under pressure. So I wanted to go for that risk. I wanted to move out there with almost no safety net practically. I had 1 month of a safety net, which really wasn't a safety net because I had other debts at the time. So I really didn't have as much of a safety net as I thought, but I put myself out there. I took the risk. It was extremely difficult. There was nights that I did not sleep. There was nights that I was self-doubt. There was nights when I thought about driving back home. There was nights where I did not know where I had to choose between rent or eating. There was a lot of tough times, but ultimately that risk has paid off for me to this day. And I just encourage everybody to take a risk. You don't have to do it to the level that I did. What I did, honestly, looking back on it, was extremely high risk. It was not just a normal risk that you could take, but I think that everybody should take some sort of risk in their life while they are young, while they do not have kids, while they don't have a mortgage, while they're not married, while the risk is solely upon you and only you. Because once you have kids, you have all these other things, you can't put the jeopardy, of your family at risk. You can't, go off and quit your job and go try to start a business when you have kids to feed, because ultimately if you don't do what you need to do to provide, your wife is going to leave you, because you need to be a provider as a man. So if you're not providing, then it's not going to work. So ultimately, I wanted to do it while I was young. I wanted to do it now. I wanted to take the risk. I wanted to not live with regret. I wanted to not blame other people. I wanted to see new things. I wanted to put myself out there, and I wanted to explore new cities, new places, new perspectives, put myself around driven people. And ultimately, those were the reasons why I decided to leave Orlando, Florida back in 2017. Now, I may move back eventually. I may move back next year, actually. I do miss a lot of things about Orlando. I think it's a fantastic place to live. But for me, I needed a couple years outside of the city. I needed to get outside of my comfort zone. I have learned so much in the past 2 years that regardless of, maybe any circumstances that I could think, well, what if I stayed? Or, this could have happened had I stayed. I do not regret it one single bit, because as a person, as a man, I have evolved tenfold. I have become much more humble. I have become much more knowledgeable. I've gained a ton of new skills that I now have for life that nobody can take away from me. And ultimately, I have the confidence in myself to know that no matter what situation I put myself in, I've survived, losing my dad to suicide in 2012. I have survived moving across the country with nothing and not knowing anybody. I have survived so many things up to this point that a lot of people just can't even fathom or think about. So I just know that no matter what, you should always take a risk. You should always bet on yourself. You should do things that make you excited to live. You should do things that make you feel alive. Like just doing the same thing day in and day out, to me, is no way to live. It's not exciting. There's no change in your day-to-day. It's redundant. And ultimately, when people do the same thing over and over and over and over, this is where you start to just become sort of a zombie. You go through the motions every day, and I did not want that to be me. So again, I think Orlando is a great place. I just needed a couple years to find myself, to explore, to just see what else was out there, and ultimately that's why I decided to leave. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up, and if you're not yet subscribed and you made it all the way to the end, make sure you subscribe down below and click the little notification bell. That way you get notified anytime I post a new video if you enjoyed this content. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.